Hey everyone. Next up is Mike McAlister. Mike has spent over 10 years crafting products for WordPress, most notably array themes and atomic blocks. He now works as a senior software engineer with WP Engine and continues to explore all things design, code, and WordPress related. Ever wanted to see behind the curtain and learn about the thought and design process that goes into creating great blocks for WordPress? In this case study, Mike McAlister will provide precisely that perspective. Here he is, Mike McAlister.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Mark. Today I'm going to be talking about the Atomic Blocks plugin and design systems and kind of how one informs the other, how they fit together. So as Mark said, I'm Mike McAlister. I've been creating WordPress products for a long time. Sometimes it feels like decades. But yes, some people might know me from a theme shop I had called Array Themes. I had themes on WordPress.com and ThemeForest and my own site. Most recently, I built the Atomic Blocks plugin, which we're here to talk about today, which along with the theme shop that I had was acquired by WP Engine in 2018. And now I work at WP Engine with my awesome team, making innovative new products for the block editor. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I want to get started by talking about design. No matter how much code I write, I'm always thinking like a designer. I've been writing code for a long time, but design is where my heart lies. And not just talking about the aesthetics of design and pushing pixels and making things pretty, but product design, traditional product design, taking a product from a prototype to the market, creating products that customers love using. So what does it mean to think like a designer? To me, and I think traditionally speaking, it's deeply understanding the problem at hand. What problem are you trying to solve? I think there's a lot of products that are out there in WordPress and otherwise that we're just kind of putting stuff out there. We're not really trying to understand the problem. We're just creating products. And thinking like a designer means really understanding the problem and understanding the end user. How's the end user need this product? What problem are we trying to solve for them? And how can we empower them with intuitive products so they can help themselves? That's a powerful thing. WordPress is incredible because it gives us the opportunity to provide that service to a third of the web. That's a huge chunk of people, excuse me, to serve. So we have a big task on our hands. And finally, it's important to remember you don't have to be a designer to think like one. Problem solving and empathy. These are things for all of us to solve and something for all products to solve. So when I started looking into the block editor, when it was just being created and being talked about, I just immediately started to think, how can we solve some of these long-standing and painful site building issues with WordPress? How do we get rid of shortcodes and guesswork and having that disconnected back end and front end, and how do we finally start to bring those two things together? Finally, we're going to have like a powerful visual site building tool natively in WordPress. It was just an incredible idea. So in 2017, I started creating the Atomic Blocks plugin, mostly just to learn the block editor and build blocks and see, what's possible. What were the limitations of the block editor? What was possible at the time? But it was mostly just to learn it. But all the while, I was also kind of creating a product alongside it, just to kind of experiment. Just a quick refresher: the Atomic Blocks plugin. It's a block library that gives you all kinds of content and site creation blocks. So lots of little bits and pieces that maybe the core block editor doesn't provide. We're providing some of those things, which we'll get into more as well. But the early days of the block editor, everything was changing every day. It was kind of chaotic. It was very difficult to follow along. The development was very fast paced, but I was adamant to learn it deeply and really understand it from a product perspective and from a customer perspective, how's a customer going to use this? What kind of things can we anticipate the user is going to do, and how do we fulfill the solutions for that? What kind of problems can it solve? So naturally, I started small, started replacing little things like shortcodes. You can see here, I've got these little notices. These are just basically text-based and a little CSS. So that was kind of the start, was the simpler things like that. Simple content blocks like notices and call to actions, testimonials, and buttons that did a little bit more than what the core buttons were doing. And it couldn't be too complicated because the editor really couldn't handle it at the beginning anyway. It was, like I said, it was breaking daily in development, so you had to kind of keep things really simple, but the concepts were there, the concepts were forming, the systems were kind of coming together, so it's every day you got a little more advanced functionality, so you could build out a little more. From there, once we had a few simple kind of content blocks, you could go a little deeper. You could go a little more advanced. So you're starting to clump together a few different elements, not just text, but now maybe you have a button, or a button and a list and an image and columns. Once you have columns, you're kind of unlocked to do a lot. You can really go crazy. And then the inner blocks feature was released, and that really took us another step further, because then you could do placeholder content. Like you see this pricing table here. You're not just spitting out an empty table and telling the customer, here, fill it out. Instead, you're showing them, this is what it could look like or should look like, and you just replace your content. It's like helps the customer build super quickly. It empowers them, solves that problem of that traditional WordPress problem. It's like, it's not what it's supposed to look like. How do I get there? So this was one step to do that. So once you've kind of mastered those and you have some more advanced sections like pricing tables, now you can start to do things like page sections. So here you have a header, which has a newsletter block in it, which has buttons, an input element, a label, and an image next to it. So then, now you're creating page sections, and you string together a few page sections, and then you have a page layout. Then you can go a little bit bigger, then you have a full page, so you can see how it really builds up pretty quickly. And another important thing is, like, this was, even at the time, this was kind of ahead of the editor in a lot of ways and what was possible, but the code wasn't really difficult. This wasn't like using code that wasn't already out there, or doing hacks or workarounds to make this happen. This is really just leaning on the block editor, the code that was output when you created sections like this, and taking that and being able to give it back to the user in a reproducible fashion. So if you can have a few pre-designed page sections, why not have a bunch of them and then deliver them in an intuitive fashion? And you can see here, this is what we're calling a layout selector, or a modal window. And we've compiled together here, a bunch of different page sections. So you have headers and text columns and media and text and all these kinds of things. You also have a layouts section where you can have full page layouts instead of just sections. And we also built in a favorites feature, so users can favorite their layouts or their page sections that they use frequently, and then come back to that later and quickly insert it and start editing and hit the ground running. So and also, you have filtering, searching, favoriting. All these things are kind of anticipating how the user is going to use it. What kind of things are they going to be, requesting when they're building sites like this? That's what this was an attempt to do. And see here, these are just some of the different page sections that we came up with. And you can see these kind of all speak the same visual language, right? They're all cohesive, and it makes it possible to combine them in virtually any order, and you still get a beautiful output. It's starting to look more like a system, starting to introduce order and consistency, and visual language. So it was around this time that, after you build out so many of these and you start to see how things are working, I started to realize that the block editor is actually, it's a design tool. We've evolved from a rigid CMS, a powerful CMS, but a rigid one previously, to this powerful visual site building tool. It's incredible. The content management is now also design management, and it's our job to help these users get new tools and intuitive tools to help them manage design themselves, because that's what they're tasked with. Themes are changing and going different directions, and we're putting more power in the hands of the user. So we have to meet that. And we're not just competing with other design tools out there, different competition like Wix and Squarespace. We're competing with ourselves. We're trying to do better than we have in the past. And that's what this step of WordPress is about. It's this incredible opportunity to invent intuitive new ways to handle this new block era. There's just so much we can do. So how can we help WordPress users succeed in this new block era? It's kind of an overwhelming thing for people, I'm sure. So what can we do as product creators and core developers? Firstly, we can start building products for humans. I kind of alluded to this at the beginning, but I think in WordPress there's a tendency to get out there and code a plugin and put it on the repo without too much consideration about maybe what the end user needs, or maybe the overall product design of a product, which is fine. I think that's one of the beautiful parts about the repo and WordPress being open source, is that you can kind of, spin up some code and hit the ground running and put something out there for people. But I think when we're talking about the block editor and really trying to solve some of these problems of the WordPress of yesteryear, we have to start growing up and maturing in how we're creating products. More intuitive UI. WordPress has been notoriously hard over the years. Ask any family member who tries to use it, or even yourself. We all know it hasn't been the best in the past, but the block editor has drastically helped that. It's much better now, and I think there's even more work being done every day to get it like a little bit closer. We just saw in 5.4 yesterday some even more improvements to the UI, so that's great. Standards is another thing. It's hard to enforce standards in open source because open source dictates that you can do whatever you want. But again, going back to how do we sort of corral this into a more complete and cohesive product, WordPress, the block editor, and the products we're building for it. Standards can help with that while still allowing flexibility and creativity. And finally, design systems. What we just saw with the atomic blocks and kind of building up into something that is a system that speaks to itself, and it kind of all works together. Consistency and time-saving components help everyone out, What is a design system? Excuse me. Traditionally defined, design system is a collection of reusable components guided by standards, and these components can be arranged in any different order and to build products, apps, pages, etc. But a design system creates order, consistency. It encourages rapid prototyping, product development, enforces your branding, and it creates standards to follow, which helps everyone. If everyone's following the same system, you kind of get reliable outcomes. A lot of you might have heard of the atomic design system, not really related to atomic blocks in any particular way, except that I think we all like science. But it uses the kind of a chemistry analogy, building block terminology. The idea that, atoms, molecules, and organisms, all these things build up into something bigger, so you have, an atom might be an input, but put next to a label and a button, then you have something that's a little more substantial, and then maybe that builds up into a widget, and how's that widget fit into a section? How does that section fit into a page? And the benefit here is that you're promoting consistency and scalability. Starting small and scaling up, you're creating a system right out the gate instead of designing after the fact.
Hey, Mike.
Yep.
We're just about out of time right now. Jeffrey's talk is going to be starting. Thank you so much for that presentation, though. I'm sorry to interrupt you there.
No problem.
That was an excellent talk, and we'll have some questions later on. Everybody listening, we're going to start with Jeffery Carandang here in just a second. Our next speaker is Jeffery Carandang. Jeffery is a WordPress specialist based in the Philippines. He loves creating clean, unique, and usable code for the web. Jeffery is going to walk us through the features provided by EditorsKit and explain what caused him to build this super helpful plugin. Let's welcome Jeffery.
Hi everyone, my name is Jeffery Carandang, and today I will be talking about how I build block styling in the EditorsKit plugin. Please bear with me as this is my first time presenting and I might have a shaky voice because of my weird local accent, but I hope you will learn a thing or two on this presentation. EditorsKit plugin has a lot of tools and very useful features that you can utilize when using Gutenberg. But today I want to focus on block styling. I will be stating the problem I want to solve, the process, and how I build the solution. When it comes to block styling, the first problem is how to add more block styling. You would probably notice that there are very limited styles available on core blocks, especially for image and list blocks. I had the same experience when I wanted to display a circular image. With that, I've started to think of the best way to solve this problem, and the best action is to provide additional image styling using core block styles component. Then, list the shapes aside from circular image, which are image with rounded corners, diagonal image, inverted diagonal image, and image with drop shadow. Same process goes with list block. What are the styles that I needed and what will be most beneficial to others, such as checklist, crossed list, list with arrow bullets, starred list, connected list, and dashed list. Next is to identify the block with similar properties or attributes to image block, which is the cover block. Then apply the same block styling. Here's how it works. Insert an image block, then choose the block styles you want to use. You can choose from available block styles when you added EditorsKit. Same goes with the list block, which you can also select bullet icon color for better list items. In line with the first problem, the next one is how to add multiple styles to a block. This is a tricky problem because the solution I had on my mind first is to allow using Control key to select multiple styling, or use multiple class names, which led me to these questions. Are multiple styles necessary or useful for all blocks? Can available core components support style combinations? What blocks do I need to have multiple block styling? I gave these questions a lot of thoughts, and here are the answers. Are multiple styles necessary or useful for all blocks? The answer is no. Only few blocks requires multiple styling. Can available core components support style combinations? The answer is yes. Register block style uses class names, which can be utilized to have multiple style combinations. What blocks do I need to have multiple block styling? I only need and think of cover and buttons block. Here are the list of blocks with multiple styling. First is the cover block, which requires any block style plus full screen display. The other one is buttons block, which requires any block style plus full width display. In here, I will demonstrate how to use the style combinations with buttons block. Just choose the style you want, then on the Advanced panel, toggle the full width options to enable the full width style display. The next problem I was trying to solve is, how can I apply style to a block's text content? Styling also applied to the text content of the blocks, like colored and highlighted text, alignments, text transforms, and indentions. Using formats is the best way to deal with text styling on Gutenberg. And so, the next step is to determine what are the necessary formats that users require. In this scenario, I've taken the TinyMCE Classic Editor as a reference guide, which has the following formats, and I've added a few more. Text color, text highlight color, superscript, subscript, special characters, indentions, text transform, justified alignment, captions alignment, and abbreviations. Here is the demonstration and implementation with these formats available on Gutenberg Editor. You can now style inline text better to any rich text blocks. The last problem I wanted to solve was how to make the Gutenberg editor styles and available options better. Are there any missing options I can add to help users save time when navigating through the editor? How can I improve writing with Gutenberg? What visual improvements can be added to ease user experience? Are there any missing features available on Classic Editor that could be helpful? Here are some features I've added to try and improve the Gutenberg editor visually. The first is Code Editor Mode Syntax Highlighter. This feature uses the existing Code Mirror library, which is already available on core WordPress packages. The next is Visual Block Guidelines, which you can toggle on and off to check each block's boundaries visually. Another visual improvements is Visible Heading Indicators, which shows what level is the heading that you are using on each heading block. Another one is Estimated Reading Time, which is available in the information section. This feature checks how long it will take a user to finish reading your post content. The next one is Hide Title. This feature enables toggling of title visibility. The other notable features are the visible drag and drop borders indications, which is available on the previous versions of Gutenberg Editor but has been removed, so I've decided to add it back. Accessible help tips and tricks to help users get some preview of available shortcuts and tricks that the block editor has. And lastly, copy and paste gradients to help everyone transfers gradient colors anywhere instead of selecting gradient picker colors again and again. That's all for block styling on EditorsKit plugin, and I hope you find this presentation very useful. Thanks again, and you can ask me anything on the live Q&A portion. You can follow me on Twitter at PHPBits and at EditorsKit for EditorsKit plugin.
Hey there! Introducing our next speaker, K.Adam White. K.Adam is a principal engineer at HumanMade, a WordPress committer and component maintainer of the WordPress REST API. He is also an artist, DJ, and ordinarily an enthusiastic traveler. Are you maintaining any projects that utilize shortcodes and looking to make the switch to blocks? K.Adam will share a few examples to help you make this transition more easily. Over to you, K.Adam.
Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me all right. Really quite a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about this. It's great to be a part of WPBlockTalk. I think that it's never been more important for us to be able to create these sorts of engaging experiences within WordPress and on the web. And I think that if we look back, there's a lot that we can learn about how to approach the block editor from the way we used to do things. The first thing I'd like to mention is that the notion of blocks, as much as we're excited about it, given how powerful the block editor is not really new. Designers have been dividing their comps and dividing their thinking up into reusable components for years. And even within WordPress, we've actually had a mechanism for building reusable components of content for quite some time. If you remember shortcodes, and many of you, I suspect, have used them quite heavily, whether through plugins or on projects you might have built yourself, shortcodes were the original dynamic reusable content element within WordPress. Shortcodes were introduced, actually I learned, just over 12 years ago this week. On March 29th, 2008, WordPress 2.5 was released, and one of the standout features of 2.5 was the gallery, the ability to actually have several images in an arrangement. This was really revolutionary, and it was all powered by a new shortcode API. The shortcode API, I love the phrasing of this, little bracket delineated strings that can be magically expanded at runtime to something more interesting. They look like this. It's very similar to an HTML tag. It's just a string that indicates, in this case, WordPress rather than your browser, that something else should go here. And when WordPress is rendering your page based on the code that you or your plugin developer has written, the shortcode will get replaced by something dynamic and something that happens on the fly when the page is rendered. So this is what you see in the editor. This is not what you would see on the front end. They can have attributes. They can have many attributes. They can wrap content. They can even occur in line within other running strings. And this makes shortcodes a really powerful tool that has been used for many of the same things that blocks are done for today. Shortcodes were the original gallery. Galleries are now a block. Shortcodes have been used to create tabbed interfaces and what we now use dynamic blocks for. Shortcodes, I would argue, are blocks, just before blocks were cool and before we had better interfaces. We tried. The Shortcake plugin, if any of you have experienced that in the past, is a really interesting way to take shortcodes and actually build out custom forms for editing them and tiny MCE views that give you the better ability to actually see what the shortcode is going to look like in your content. But this talk's not called From Shortcodes to Shortcake, it's called From Shortcodes to Blocks, because the tools that we have now are so far in advance of everything that we've had before. And so for the rest of this presentation, I'm going to share what we have learned in working with some of our partners and some of our clients to migrate large-scale sites that are heavily dependent upon shortcodes into the block editor. The examples that I'm going to be sharing are from a company called Finder. We partnered with Finder to take a look at their editorial process and figure out how to move things forward away from the very shortcode dependent system that they had in the past for a variety of reasons, from editor UX all the way through to performance. And Finder is a great company to work with. They have a lot of really interesting dynamic data on their site. What they do, they were a founded independent company in Australia. They now operate in a number of countries around the world, and they give you tools to compare all kinds of different things, whether that's credit cards or loans. They take all of the different options that might be relevant to you, and they let you facet and filter down all of this data to figure out and make an informed choice about what service you want to go with. And they have a lot of shortcodes. Because they're so data-driven, because it's so critical for them to have the content be accurate and timely, shortcodes are 80%, 90% of the content of their site. And so our first step was to take that list and was to audit it down. We wanted to look at the list of shortcodes they had and figure out which ones were in use and where they were in use. This exercise of actually making a list and looking at what pages they occur on gives us the ability to prioritize. If we take hundreds of shortcodes, we obviously don't have the ability to start there when we can't build them all at once. We have to start somewhere. And so if we prioritize that list, and if we work with the business owners to say which of these is on the high traffic pages, which of these are on pages that the editors frequently interact with, that gives us kind of a sense of what the initial shortcodes we want to migrate are. Once you've identified the priority, planning how to migrate a shortcode is actually not as trivial as I might make it seem, because since shortcodes were the only thing we had for so many years, they can be used in a number of different ways. And the block editor has given us a number of different constructs and ways of describing the work that a shortcode used to do. The simplest, of course, is a dynamic block. The notion that a shortcode is an individual piece of content that gets replaced by something that is either rendered on the server or maybe that loads a custom front-end widget. They can also be used to render static blocks. They can be used to show that, maybe a video, or originally, as I mentioned, the galleries. These are things that used to be shortcodes and now are blocks. Sometimes shortcodes actually just serve as a wrapper that applies a particular container with a certain class. I've seen a number of shortcodes that actually re-implement things that we have native controls for even in the classic editor, but they did it for the purpose of adding visual variants. This is what a block style should be used for, and I believe there's going to be a great presentation about some of the options with block styling later on today. And of course, if you saw Matthias and Matt's conversation this morning, I hope you're as excited as I am about block patterns, because this is going to be really tremendously powerful for us to be able to say that one shortcode that maybe did a whole bunch of things can actually be replaced in many cases by built-in blocks composed into a pattern. So once you've built out your prioritized list, and once you have a sense of the top priority shortcode of each of those different types, we then worked together with Finder's team, and in particular their senior engineer, Michael Cantor, to build out reference implementations for each block. This is where we learned a number of things that we think we're going to want to draw upon for all future shortcode migrations. For example, it's very important to avoid duplicating your render logic. Shortcodes usually have some sort of PHP function that returns the HTML that you're going to use to display the shortcode. This is the same logic you should be using for your block. We're eventually going to want to move it into the block, because the goal, of course, would be to deprecate the legacy shortcode. But you don't want to have two functions that return the same shape of HTML. If you do, the likelihood that those are going to drift and that you're going to run into trouble down the road if you need to make updates to them increases dramatically. And one of the most important things that we found you need to do when you're migrating a shortcode, it's not just defining the editor interface, it's not just registering attributes. You can learn about those on the Gutenberg documentation, the Block Editor Handbook, and other talks, but I want to talk about transforms, because this is, for me, the killer feature of the block editor from the standpoint of bringing forward a legacy site. A transform is a way to say, I have encountered, I being in this case the block editor, what I believe to be a shortcode if I'm parsing a classic block. The transform says, given the shortcode, in this case tag caption, I want to have that shortcode converted to my block, and I want the attributes on that shortcode to convert to block attributes in a certain way. What this means is that we can take a screen like this, where the editorial team at Finder had been stuck only using the code editor because it was so critical that they not break any shortcodes, and shortcodes aren't really native to TinyMCE, so it was very easy to make a mistake. They weren't really allowed to use the visual editor for fear that the transition would break content. And we can say, we can hit this one button, and we can take that and turn all of that content into a WYSIWYG experience where if you click on a block that represents what used to be a shortcode, now you have all those controls right there in line. It works if you're converting old content. It also works if you're copying and pasting. And because Finder is so heavily data-driven, they have some very interesting back-end systems that have evolved to output shortcodes that would then be pasted into the editor within WordPress. Just by defining the transform, they can use that exact same process. Just now, instead of staring at text in the code editor, once they paste it, they're getting this full rich experience. It's a significantly improved editorial experience that removes a lot of the back and forth between systems that slows a company like Finder or a newsroom down. So At this stage, we've got our reference implementations of all of our blocks. We know the different solutions that we want to use to handle different types of shortcode. This is where we can start onboarding more of the team and spreading the work out among a technical organization to work on that migration and to drive it forward. But this all makes it sound very easy. And of course, I think I speak for many of you in saying that when I go to a case study, what I'm really looking for are the things that didn't go right, the things that I ran into that were more inconsistent. And we'll definitely get into that briefly. First lesson is that transform matching is quite inconsistent. If you're parsing a classic block, sometimes the text, the raw parser or the shortcode parser will miss something if it's right butting up against a closing tag, or if there isn't enough line breaks in between the shortcode and the content preceding it. Additionally, and I think much worse for our purposes, at least initially, shortcode transforms do not support wrapped content in any way. The shortcode transform is only capable, at least the one inside Gutenberg, the type shortcode, only is able to handle attributes to block attributes. We worked around this not just by ignoring all of that, but by using a raw transform instead. And then we used wp.shortcode.next function, which is an element of the shortcode library that is exposed by the block editor that we use to parse the raw text of that surrounding node and return a set of blocks ourselves in that transform method. And it does work. We're able to take a nested set of shortcodes and we're able to convert it to an arbitrary set of blocks. But I definitely think that there's some room for improvement, because even as this experience that we have now is functional and works really well, there are open tickets out there on the Gutenberg repo that I think will let us take these same processes and actually build even more support for them into the block editor. Another thing we learned is that there's a lot of work needed for bulk conversion. The CLI tools that we have and our sort of general understanding of what type of preview and QA process is needed for a shortcode to block migration, I think is continuing to evolve. And because so much of the existing WordPress tooling is PHP based through WP CLI, and so much of Gutenberg is JavaScript based, it's possible that we may need to evolve some additional node tools or some additional recursive browser tools that use an API to be able to do this at scale in a way that really meets the needs of enterprise level clients that have to make sure they QA everything for accuracy. And finally, we need so much more documentation. The documentation within Gutenberg is fantastic, but there's a lot of things around transforms and the formats data structure that are kind of passing mentions, if anything, in the handbook. And this is an area where I'd encourage everyone involved to open issues, submit content to the block editor handbook documentation, and see whether we can flesh this out into something where it can really be a good resource for us all. So that's a very brief overview, and I'm almost out of time, but you may have noticed that I skipped one particular type of thing. I skipped inline shortcodes. And in the last minute that I have, I want to note that we have done some, I think, fairly interesting work around looking at how we can use the formats of the text formatting API inside the rich text component to actually take a piece of dynamic shortcode content and convert that into something that we can edit through the block editor front ends. The basic way it works is that we can wrap the shortcode in a format at the API level when it's coming out of WordPress, and we can strip that format when it's going back in so that only the format, the shortcode itself gets saved to the database. And then we can add this sort of inline preview by layering formats, and that's definitely out of scope for this talk, but I'd love to talk about it later on. There's also, as before, a number of topics and tickets open around how we can actually explore what we want this interface to look like going forward. So that was a bit of a whirlwind, but I think shortcodes and blocks are a really, really great match. I think that there's a lot that we can do around having this sort of mentality of, we've been doing this for a while, let's figure out how to bring those sites forward and really leverage what the block editor can do for us. That's going to make a huge difference to everybody using WordPress and on these organizations and these sites, and I'm really excited about it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, K.Adam. We now have the Q&A session with all three speakers. We've got Mike McAlister, Jeffery Carandang, and K.Adam White. So let's see. Gentlemen, let's see what the questions have for us right now. Birgit has a question for Mike. How hard will it be for you to move things over, page layouts, block patterns, to the new API for block patterns and full site editing?
Great question. That actually was part of the end of my talk. It kind of ties back into block patterns. The block patterns was actually inspired by what we were doing with our layout modal, and so it was cool to see that kind of come to life in core. How hard would it be? Not hard at all, actually, because the code that that powers our layouts is all just block code. So that literally can just be moved from where we're at in this layout modal into the new API. It ports over very easily. And so we're hoping to get some sort of, some similar features of what we're doing. And I'm watching those conversations in core and chatting with people there as well. So it won't be hard at all. I'm actually excited to see this kind of feature happen in core. It's very, very cool.
Right on. Thank you for that. Another question from Marcio asks for Jeffrey. Is there a way to insert the reading time in the content itself?
Yeah. For now, it's via shortcode, which is available in the plugin information on WordPress.org, or when you go to settings of EditorsKit, there's a tutorial there on how you can add the shortcode. It would be translated to a block later on because it's Gutenberg. There are few requests before, so I've just added it at shortcode right now.
All right. Jamie asks for Jeffrey also, do you need to keep the EditorsKit installed in order for your changes to persist, or can you delete it after you're done using it?
Excellent question. That depends on what feature you're using for EditorsKit plugin. For example, you're just using the block guidelines and copy and paste gradients and some other Gutenberg editor styling. You can deactivate EditorsKit plugin. But if you would be using the full button width, block styles, these styles, then those stylings need to be available on front end as well. So when you're using that features, you don't need to deactivate the plugin. You need to access the style sheet that EditorsKit plugin has.
Okay, thank you. The last question I see for today is from Birgit asking for K.Adam. Will K.Adam or Human Made be able to release some of the code from your demos?
Absolutely. Obviously, I can't release the code that we wrote for Finder because that was for their project and that's that goes with their platform. But we've definitely been taking some steps to take these same approaches and figure out a way to build some demos that show how we can do, in particular, the inline dynamic content in a way that's portable to a variety of different sites. And that's something that I'm hoping to get to prioritize in the near future to get that out the door. Need to prioritize unblocking the mobile team around some of the API issues they're having first. But as soon as that's sorted, that's the next thing. So definitely, Birgit.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I believe that's it for the questions. So great job, speakers. And for the listeners, we'll get to the next session here very shortly. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, folks.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.